Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Family Matters. Tomás Bogardus is an Associate Professor of Philosophy at Seaver College in Malibu, California. Tough place. And he gained his PhD in philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin and now works mainly in metaphysics and epistemology. I hope that's how you say it, and is most interested in the mind-body problem and the rationality of religious belief. And Thomas has published a number of papers, including a 2020 paper entitled Evaluating Arguments for the Sex-Gender Distinction. And that's exactly what we want this discussion to be about today. One of the trickiest questions in the world today is, what is a woman? And interestingly, nobody is asking, what is a man? But maybe the question is implied. Thomas, welcome to Family Matters. I don't know if you've ever got down to New Zealand.
I haven't, but I've always wanted to. That's one of my dreams, to one day visit New Zealand.
Okay, well, we'll work on that. Look, before we start, I just want to show a couple of clips. Firstly, of the recent Supreme Court nominee for the US Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown, being asked to define what is a woman. And then a couple of examples from our neighbours in Australia who really struggle with this definition. Let's just have a quick watch.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
What do you say a woman is?
I believe that everyone can identify for themselves.
Okay. Do you believe then that men can become pregnant and have abortions?
Yes.
As the Office for Women, what definition of woman do you use?
What definition of women do we use? Could you maybe give us a bit more context
of course.
for the question?
You oversee and promote a range of initiatives, funding programs, specifically designated for women. How do you define what a woman is to determine eligibility for the purposes of providing advice on women's policy to government and ministers?
So, in terms of in the Office for Women, we recognise individuals who identify as women, and that's in accordance with the Australian Government guidelines on the recognition of sex and gender.
So to be clear then, the Office for Women is not focused exclusively on policies for the betterment of biological women.
Senator, I think I can only repeat what I've just said in terms of what we do is following the Australian Government guidelines.
Righto. Well, I'm going to finish up then, because this hasn't been very helpful, with a very simple question for the department, and that is one which has troubled me for a great deal of time with the bureaucracy here. Can someone please provide me with a definition of what a woman is? Department of Health. Definition of a man, definition of a woman. Anyone?
It's pretty basic.
Basic stuff. Professor Murphy.
I think there are a variety of definitions, and I think
just a simple
perhaps to give a more fulsome answer, we should take that on notice.
You're going to take on notice the question of what a woman is.
No, well, there are variety. It's a very contested space at the moment, Senator.
It's not just a woman who's born a woman.
But there are definitions in terms of how people identify themselves. So we're happy to provide our working definition on those.
I've only been here 2 years. That's the best thing I've seen thus far. Thank you so much.
And a group of feminists in New Zealand, Thomas, recently put up a billboard in our capital city, Wellington, which was simply the dictionary definition of woman, adult human female. And after howls of protest and media coverage, the billboard company actually took it down. And in fact, this feminist group struggles to rent public buildings to even discuss the issue of women. And finally, recently, a public school in New Zealand posted on their Facebook page to celebrate Pride Week that apparently there are 112 genders and more than 200 sexualities. So, and that was a public school, state school. So this debate is alive and well in New Zealand also. I thought just to start with, Thomas, could I just ask you, is it okay for two men to discuss the definition of woman?
Right. Yeah, this is an objection I sometimes hear. It's something that people bring up. Why are these men talking about what it is to be a woman? And I think the question is motivated by what in philosophy we would call standpoint epistemology. And the thought is just basically that in order to have any sort of knowledge about a topic, you have to have the right sort of position or standing. And so this is the kind of thought that you hear expressed if there's a panel on abortion and there's too many men or all men. Somebody might say, where are all the women? This is a women's issue. You need to consult people who are directly impacted by this sort of issue. And so I think the same sort of thought is being expressed when people say, why are men discussing what it is to be a woman? And I guess the short answer is just, look, we could have this conversation just in terms of what it is to be a man. And then we would have standing, even by lights of people who are convinced by this standpoint epistemology. But the reason that this issue is so hotly contested these days, I take it, is because of women's spaces, not really because of men's spaces. The debate is about who should be able to access women's sports and women's prisons and women's shelters, women's changing rooms, etc. So that's why the debate is framed in terms of what a woman is. There seems to be much less concern about trans individuals who identify as men wishing to play men's sports or go to men's prisons for some reason. So that's why it's framed in terms of what a woman is, but all the same moves and arguments and thoughts would apply if we were just talking about what it is to be a man. So we could, if you wanted to, but again, as I say, the pressing issue these days is what is a woman.
And so the billboard was put up by this feminist group that a woman is, according to the dictionary, an adult human female. Did the dictionary get it right?
So I think the dictionary accurately reports the concept that is typically expressed by the word woman in so-called dominant and mainstream contexts. Traditionally, historically, that's what the word has meant. That's what the word has expressed. Some reason to think so is that we have words for the adult males and the adult females in other species that we're acquainted with, that we come in contact with. So if you think about cows and horses and ducks and rabbits and deer and so on, it's very common for humans to introduce words to track the difference between the adults and the juveniles in these species, and to track the difference between the males and the females in these species. So it would be totally astonishing if we didn't introduce words like that for our own species. We're most acquainted with our own species. We have the greatest interest in tracking those distinctions for our own species. So wouldn't it be totally surprising if we hadn't introduced words for those distinctions? And it looks pretty clear that the best candidates are man and woman for the adult males and the adult females, boy and girl for the juvenile males and the juvenile females. But what's interesting is I think even trans rights activists, trans inclusive philosophers agree on this. They think the dictionary is accurately reporting what the word what the word commonly means, what it has traditionally meant, but they wish to change that. They want to change the meaning of the word. But they acknowledge that that was the meaning of the word.
But is that the best definition for us to use? Adult, human, female? I mean, are those terms slam dunk terms in themselves, so it puts the argument beyond doubt?
Yeah. Well, I've noticed these days a much more common retort or reply or question if you mention the dictionary definitions. People start asking, well, what does it mean to be female? Isn't that term poorly understood and just as contentious and so on? And isn't it, I don't know, they have objections to the very idea that there are males and females. You might have heard that, sex is a spectrum, it's not binary, and people will bring up intersex conditions to try to problematize or try to convince you that biological sex is much more complicated than just having males and females.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back to that intersex. Okay. I think that's a really important kind of one to respond to. But adult is fairly objectively defined, as is human. But female, what do we mean by that?
Yeah. So as I said, that is increasingly a source of confusion for a lot of people. And I think part of the source of the confusion is that when people reflect on what it is to be female, they tend to focus on human females. And so they'll come up with answers like, they'll give you sort of stereotypes about how females typically dress and behave, or they'll talk about hormone levels or certain bits of anatomy or something.
Right.
And similarly for being male. But or chromosomes, I should have mentioned that. That's the typical sort of answer. People will say female, that's XX chromosomes. Male, that's XY chromosomes.
Yeah.
But if you reflect on other species and realize that there are males and females across the animal kingdom, across the plant kingdom, sexual reproduction is a long-standing strategy among animals and plants. And the only thing that unifies males across all these species has nothing to do with chromosomes. Other species do it very differently genetically. Has nothing to do with hormone levels, because other species do that differently as well. Has nothing to do with anatomy or physiology or genitalia. Really what all males have in common is just this: they are naturally disposed to produce sperm. And similarly with females, what females have in common across the plant and animal kingdoms is this natural disposition to produce large gametes, ova, or eggs. So that's what it is to be male, and that's what it is to be female. In humans, our biological sex is programmed or determined by our chromosomes. It's genetically determined. But that's different from saying that chromosomes are part of the definition of what it is to be male or female. So that's one thing I thought I'd point out. And
that's interesting because generally in this debate, we tend to come back to those three things. Well, difference between male and female is based on chromosomes, genitals, and hormones. But that can be problematic, can't it?
Yeah, I think these are typical markers of biological sex, especially in humans. You can think of typical characteristics that males have. They tend to maybe have higher levels of testosterone, lower levels of estrogen, certain kinds of anatomical characteristics, and certain chromosome combinations. But again, if you think about other species, you'll realize that those sorts of characteristics are unique to humans. Right. They're correlated with being male in humans, but that's not what it means to be male. Again, just think about other species. And I just wanted to quickly add, in case your viewers enter into these sort of discussions, I was careful to emphasize in defining male and female that these are defined in terms of a natural disposition to produce sperm or eggs. Because a really quick kind of reply that you'll often hear is, what about women who no longer produce eggs? Maybe their ovaries were removed. Or what about men who don't produce sperm due to injury or disease or so on? Well, if you're careful to define these terms in terms of natural dispositions, it's possible for an organism to be disposed in a certain direction, to have a function of doing a certain thing, and yet not fulfill that function or not manifest that disposition. Just as like a wine glass might be disposed to break, even if it never breaks, right? It has a disposition that's never actualized. So something similar could happen with males and females, but nevertheless, as long as they have the disposition, as long as they have the function, they are males and they are females, even if the function is being interfered with or thwarted in some way by age or injury or disease. All right.
So those who reject the dictionary definition, the adult human female, to define a woman, on what basis do they do that? What's the rejection based on?
Right. So I think there's two camps here. Some people, when they hear the dictionary definition, they think that has always been false. That's always been wrong. Women have never been adult human females. Men have never been adult human males. And they give some arguments for that conclusion. And you mentioned a paper of mine, Evaluating Arguments for the Sex-Gender Distinction. Those are the arguments that I respond to in that paper. I think they're not very good arguments. But there's another camp of people who, as I said, they acknowledge that the dictionary did get it right. Traditionally, historically, commonly, that's what people mean when they talk about women and men. That's who they're referring to. But they think we should change it. And if you're asking on what grounds or what basis do they think that, they will tell you it's to advance the cause of social justice. It's to advance the cause of feminism, they might say. And typically what they mean is there will be very good consequences. They promise that there will be good consequences. And the consequences they tend to have in mind, chief among those consequences is, in their view, the positive consequence, the benefit of positively affirming people's self-identifications. And so this is more, I'm a philosopher, this is more a question for psychologists, whether that's true, whether there really is that sort of benefit. But that's what trans activists and trans inclusive philosophers have in mind. They think that there's a very great good to be achieved if we treat people the way that they perceive themselves. That's how they would put it.
And actually that leads into the next question is just that, and I know that you study religions and, the understandings around that. The difference between someone who has a religious understanding of humanity against someone who is maybe an atheist. I mean, one of the interesting things that I find in the debate here is that we as a Christian-based organisation are holding hands with feminist groups who probably disagree with many of our stances on certain issues, and yet we completely are hand in hand on understanding that actually the definition of woman does matter, and you just can't choose your gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And the way I see things, I'm experiencing the same sort of thing. This entering into this issue and publishing on this issue has put me in contact with people who otherwise I wouldn't have much to talk about, or we wouldn't agree on very much. There's interesting alliances that are being formed between religious folks, Christian folks, and people of other religions as well, and just sort of hardcore, hard-nosed naturalists, atheists, who nevertheless think that there are facts out there in the world that aren't determined by us. They're not made true by us. There's just a fact of the matter when it comes to what a woman is or what a man is. And it's not really up to us to draw the boundaries or change these things by convention. And then, as you said, there's also, radical feminists and gender critical feminists who agree on as you say, on many other issues I myself wouldn't have much in common with, but they agree with that dictionary definition. And so I think what's going on here is the way to see the distinction isn't between Christians and atheists, because that would only allow for two categories. I think the way to view the landscape here is there are people who believe in, like a supernatural reality. I'm in that camp. I'm a Christian. So they believe in a sort of supernatural reality. They think that God exists and that there are certain truths that we didn't invent and that we didn't create. They were made true by God, ultimately. And then there are two other camps on the other side. There are atheists of one variety who, as I said, are naturalists, hardcore naturalists. And they tend to think that there is a world out there. There's nothing supernatural out there, but there's a world independent of our minds that we didn't create. And so there are facts that we should be responsive to. Those are the naturalists. And as we say, that's a kind of alliance that's being formed here between the supernaturalists and the naturalists against this third camp. And I think it's really important to understand the third camp. I think this camp also tends to be atheists. They don't tend to believe in anything supernatural. But what's important to know about this camp is they tend to think of truth as something that we create. Anything that's true is true because of conventions that we've adopted. Or as they would put it, all these things are social constructions. We built them, we made them. It's up to us that there are 7 continents, for example. We made the continents, so to speak, which sounds kind of silly if you think like in terms of tectonic plates and everything. We didn't do that, but we categorized the globe in terms of 7 continents. We categorized human society in terms of 2 genders, they would say, but we could change that. If we wanted there to be more genders, that's within our power to do. Just as we could change the rules of, rugby or cricket. I don't know what you do down there.
Yeah, rugby.
Just as we could change the rules of rugby if we wanted to, because we invented those, we could change the rules of gender and sex if we wanted to. We could change the rules of biological sex. And so I would call this camp a postmodernist camp, a sort of creative anti-realist camp. And I think that's the camp that this gender ideology is coming from.
And Thomas, I think I alerted you to the fact in an email that actually one of the founders of this ideology was a Kiwi, was John Money, who I think was raised in the Waikato in New Zealand. Look, we seem to have made it very complicated, though. I mean, if we were defining it to a child, I remember the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, you might remember it, Kindergarten Cop, where the little child says, the difference between a boy and a girl, that's easy. Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina, and that was it. We wouldn't use a dictionary definition. We've got very complicated about this, haven't we?
In terms of how we would teach it to children, you mean? You think, or you're saying like even
to children and in society.
Even a child grasps this distinction, you might think. Yeah. And I think it's a very natural distinction to grasp, because although postmodernists like to point to, the color spectrum, and the conventions of rugby and state lines and so on, in order to prove their case that like everything's a social construction, they like to point to cases where things aren't very clear. And they say, look, we're the ones that drew the boundaries. We're the ones who drew the lines. In this case, when it comes to biological sex, the difference between males and females, the difference seems quite obvious, actually, and part of nature. It's not something we created. This strategy of sexual reproduction has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. It's been happening for a long time. And I think it's an easy distinction to grasp. I think children do it, especially children who are raised around pets or animals. Our daughter grew up around chickens and rabbits. So I don't think she ever really wondered what the difference was between males and females. That was always just very obvious. I think it helps if children have siblings. That's another way that this distinction is drawn for them. But I would just caution really quickly. I think that if children pick up on the distinction in terms of external genitalia or external signs like that, then they will be vulnerable to certain kinds of objections. Objections in terms of like, well, what do you do with difficult cases of people suffering from intersex conditions whose genitalia is ambiguous or so on? Does that mean we have a third sex here? If sex has to do with genitalia, and here we've got, due to a disorder of sexual development, we've got ambiguous genitalia, does that mean it's a third sex? Whereas if you understand biological sex, in my view, correctly, in terms of a natural disposition to produce gametes, these sorts of cases aren't problematic.
Yeah, and actually that's a perfect segue into, I've read your paper and you talk about the objections to the definition that we would understand of what is a woman, what is a man. In your view, what is the best objection? Perhaps I'll kick it off, because I think probably the one that most people struggle with is the intersex one. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think the reason that's brought up in this debate, some people wonder, like, well, if we're talking about gender, why are we bringing up intersex conditions? And obviously trans individuals who identify as women, at least not all of them, and most of them don't have any sort of intersex condition. So why is this relevant? Well, I think it's relevant in this way. I think it's because this is meant to be a challenge to the dictionary definition of woman and the dictionary definition of man, given as they are in terms of being female and male. And the objection goes like this. They say, look, you're thinking of biological sex as binary in this way. There are two categories, male and female. Everybody must be in one or the other. You can't be in both and you can't be in neither. You have to be in exactly one of them. And they say, and I have actual quotations of people saying this, even though it sounds kind of incredible, they say, on this conception of biological sex that the dictionary is relying on, they say, everybody will clearly fall into one or the other category. Everybody will be clearly male or clearly female. So you've got to be one or the other. You can't be both, and it will be clear which one you are. And then you can see why differences of sexual development, disorders of sexual development would be relevant here, if only because in many of these cases, it's often unclear whether the individual is male or female. I think that in most of these cases, upon reflection and investigation, it becomes clear whether the individual is male or female. But based on like a surface observation, often it's unclear. And so that's why it's brought up. They're challenging a kind of naive conception of what biological sex is. Two categories, you got to be in one or the other. It's always clear which one you're in. But I don't think that's the truth about biological sex. I think the truth is there are two categories. But if you reflect on other species, you'll realize that, and just reflect on the definitions of what it is to be male and female, it is possible for an organism to have both dispositions, to be disposed both to produce eggs and to produce sperm. And many organisms do this. Flowering plants, a lot of flowering plants produce both sperm and eggs. The ordinary garden snail, at least around here, it's an ordinary garden snail. I don't know how things are down there. But ordinary garden snails are simultaneous hermaphrodites. Yeah. They naturally produce both sperm and eggs. So I don't think that there are any natural simultaneous hermaphrodites in humans. But this is just supposed to show you that there's nothing in our concepts of male and female that require that any organism you pick is going to be either male or female, never both. Because garden snails are both, flowering plants are both. And a lot of organisms are neither. There's a lot of organisms that don't reproduce sexually at all. And so they're neither male nor female.
So that's a danger when you reduce it to being based on chromosomes or on hormones, because there's variation, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that's right. If you say that, to be male is to be XY chromosomes and to be female is XX, you will quickly be informed that there are other sort of chromosomal arrangements that can happen in humans. You can have XXY chromosomes, XYY. You can just have individuals just have one X chromosome. And so then you will be puzzled. If that was your conception of biological sex, you'll say, oh, I think maybe there are more than two biological sexes. And the last thing I was going to say was, and this is the most important bit, but also I just wanted to make it very clear that I'm not saying that any human is both male and female. I was just pointing out that hypothetically, there could be organisms that are both male and female, and garden snails are an example of that. But what's most important to respond to the intersex objection is just to say there's no guarantee in nature that any biological category will always clearly apply or clearly not apply. Just think about all of our other biological categories, including like the main biological category, that of life. It's often unclear whether something's alive or something's dead. A lot of people have faced this reality when dealing with end-of-life care, right? It's often unclear whether the person is still here, whether the person is still alive or dead. Also, there are cases like viruses and prions, which replicate and kind of look like they're alive, but it's unclear whether they're alive or dead. So in a similar way, there's no guarantee that our biological concepts of male and female will always clearly apply or clearly not apply. And so if there are humans with differences or disorders of sexual development where it's not clear whether the individual is male or female, this is exactly what you would expect on an ordinary understanding of male and female. It's just another vague biological category.
But then isn't the argument that, in fact, there is variation and therefore it's not set in stone?
There's certainly variation with a lot of what are called markers of sex. When it comes to, as we've said, anatomy, genitalia, chromosomes, right, hormone levels, there is a lot of variation. And so if you hear somebody say sex is a spectrum, it's not binary, typically what they have in mind is, look, there are several markers of sex, they'll say. You can be chromosomally male or chromosomally female. You can be hormonally male or hormonally female. You can be, with regard to your genitalia, you can be male or female. And all of these categories, they'll say, can be arranged on a spectrum. With regard to hormone levels, you can have more or less testosterone, more or less estrogen. With regard to external anatomy and the sort of phenotype, your secondary sex characteristics, with regard to your skeleton shape and your musculature, you can have more or less of these sorts of quantities. And so they'll conclude, look, whatever you meant by sex, you meant chromosomes or hormones or genitals or something like that. All of these things can be arranged on a spectrum. So sex is a spectrum. But I think the right response is, these are markers of sex, but a marker of sex is not itself sex. Here's just a quick analogy. There are appearances that we rely on when we're categorizing things as gold or not gold. There are typical appearances of gold. Gold is typically yellow, shiny, soft, and so on. We rely on those appearances when we're trying to determine whether or not something's gold. But the appearances are different from actually being gold. And you can see that by just realizing sometimes gold doesn't appear to be gold. And there are some things that appear to be gold that aren't gold, like fool's gold. And so in a similar way, we've got these things that typically come along with being male or female, the typical appearances of being male or female, hormone levels, chromosomes, genitalia, and so on. But these are different. These ways in which sex typically appears is different from what sex actually is. And again, what I think sex actually is, you can figure that out by just thinking about other species and realizing, oh, it's this natural disposition to produce certain kinds of gametes. And so if somebody says, well, look, sex is highly variable, it's on a spectrum, what they're really talking about are the markers of sex. And then I'll just say one other thing really quick to kind of hammer this point home. The way you can see that these markers of sex are not really themselves biological sex is ask, well, what do you mean by chromosomal sex, for example? And they'll say, well, to be chromosomally male is to have XY chromosomes. To be chromosomally female is to have XX chromosomes. And now ask them, well, why is XY chromosomes chromosomally male? Why did you say that was chromosomally male? And the answer has to be, oh, because that's the sort of chromosomal structure that human males typically have. And there they use the word male in its true sense. They said human males tend to have XY chromosomes. Yes. Now tell me what male means in that sense. That's the true fundamental sense of male. And again, I think the answer has to be natural dispositions towards producing certain kinds of gametes.
And that's the interesting thing, is that for transgender people, they try to align themselves with the, as you say, the characteristics of the opposite sex that they want to identify with. Thomas, we're just about out of time. In this debate, it's become very heated. I know it is in the States, it is in New Zealand, throughout the world. And I guess my final question to you is, when we come into contact with family and people we know, and just in our circles of influence, what do you think is the best polite, grace-filled response that we can give in this debate when we're simply trying to argue that we need to recognize biological truth and that we have been created male and female? How do you, what's your advice for us just in tackling that?
Well, right. So I've gotten this question before, and I think one thing that Christians could meditate on is Peter's advice in 1 Peter chapter 3, where he gives advice that typically Christian apologists like to quote. This is where Peter says, roughly, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have within. But he says, do this with gentleness and respect, so that you're above reproach, and anyone who criticizes you is like put to shame or something like that, so that they realize like they can't really criticize your character. And so I think what Peter is saying is there's sort of a balance that Christians are meant to strike. They are supposed to speak up for the truth and to defend the truth and to give reasons in favor of the truth, but also to do this with gentleness and respect. And so I guess if you're approaching this sort of issue, those are the two things that you're trying to balance, and you're trying to find a golden mean between two extremes. You don't want to defend truth so aggressively and so abrasively that you just create hostility and resentment. But also you don't want to be so kind and gentle that you've given up defending the truth. So those are the two things we have to balance. And I think just practically, here's a couple pieces of advice in this debate. One is, I think that it might help to acknowledge that people advocating for new revisionary definitions of gender have good intentions. They really have in mind that by doing this, they'll make the world a better place. They will positively affirm people's self-conceptions, and those people as a result will be happier and healthier. And that really is, I think, the motivation. And so I think it's good to acknowledge that, that there are good intentions here. And then one other bit, which I think is also practical, is it's important to know that people advocating for these revisionary gender definitions, a lot of them anyway, still have a respect and a concern for truth. And so they would be disturbed if they were to find out that what they're saying really isn't true. And so there is still a respect for truth. In fact, they want the language of misgendering is some indication here. Like the fact that they call it misgendering suggests that they think there's a truth about the gender here and you are not recognizing it. So there's still a respect for truth there. And that, I think, hopefully gives us enough common grounds to make some progress in this debate.
Do you think this debate can be resolved?
I think it can. I think, yeah, I'm sort of an optimistic person, I guess. But I've noticed something recently in the debate and the way the debate is progressing. A major thrust of my work has been to try to point out that no matter which revisionary definition we propose, like whatever we're told woman means now, or whatever it should mean now, whatever definition we get has to fail. It cannot possibly respect everybody's self-identification. There will be some trans individuals who identify as women who don't meet the definition, or there will be some people who meet the definition but who don't identify as women. And so there's just no way to craft a definition that will include everybody that these folks want to be included and exclude everybody who these folks want to be excluded. Yeah. And I think that people are starting to realize that and starting to concede that. And so I think the momentum in favor of self-identification and enshrining that in law and allowing people to play sports or access prisons or go into shelters based purely on self-identification. I think that there is a reason to think that, yeah, as I said, the momentum behind that will weaken. And maybe even reverse.
And I was going to say, I mean, has it amazed you? I don't know how long you've sort of been in this research. I'm assuming a couple of decades.
Well, the gender stuff, just about 6 or 7 years, but in philosophy, I guess, yeah about 2 decades now.
Yeah, well, actually, that was my point, is that when you began your academic career, did you think that we were going to be having this interview, that we were going to be debating the definition of man and woman?
Yeah. I reflect on that sometimes because I guess in every field, this is the case, that when you're receiving your training, you're being trained using lessons from like past battles and past conversations, not really knowing what you'll actually be doing with this training. I imagine that's how it is, for military generals and so on. They learn about past battles, not really knowing how future wars are going to be like. And so, yeah, I've reflected on that because I really had no idea that I would one day be writing papers on this topic. But I guess that's the way philosophical careers progress. You receive a certain kind of training, and especially as a Christian philosopher, if you view this as a sort of ministry or a vocation, then you just have to be prepared for whatever conversation you're called to engage in.
Well, Thomas, we really appreciate your time. I will direct people to your research paper and put the link in the description section and encourage people to read it so they can see it more in depth than we've been able to cover. But thank you for your time. Hopefully one day we can get you to New Zealand with your family and you can see our beautiful country. But we really appreciate your time today.
All right, I would love that. Thank you so much.